Okay, now we're going to do parasympathetic. In parasympathetic division, it's called craniosacral. And the reason why it's called craniosacral, okay, this is in the supplement. The reason why it's called craniosacral is because that's where we find the preganglionic cell bodies. Either in your brain, that's the cranial part, or in your sacral spinal cord, that's the sacral part. So where do we find parasympathetic? We find it cranial or in the sacrum. Craniosacral in origin. By what nerves coming from the brain have parasympathetic preganglionic fibers? So here's our brain. And I have the brain stem leading to the spinal cord. I have temporal lobe. That's a sad looking. Right. We have nuclei in the brainstem. These are found in the midbrain, found in the pons, found in medulla oblongata. From this part of the brain, there are 4 cranial nerves that exit that are part of the parasympathetic division. They are cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, 10. Cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10 have preganglionic fibers for the parasympathetic division. Cranial nerve 3 is going to synapse on a postganglionic partner that will go to your iris. So cranial nerve 3 is the preganglionic fiber. And what neurotransmitter will it release? AA, remember, acetylcholine. And that postganglionic fiber will terminate on the iris of the eye. And you get pupillary constriction. Good. Cranial nerve 7 will synapse on a postganglionic neuron. And it's going to go to glands. That postganglionic neuron is going to go to glands for producing saliva. It will also go to the lacrimal gland to produce tears. Okay? Cranial nerve 9 will also synapse on postganglionic neurons. And that postganglionic neuron is going to go to also glands to produce saliva. You have more than one salivary gland. You've got parotid, you've got sublingual, and submandibular. Cranial nerve 9 is going to go to the biggie, the parotid gland. Cranial nerve 10 extends a long way. Cranial nerve 10 can go to your chest, it can go to your abdomen. It is the only cranial nerve that extends from your brain that can go all the way down to your gut. It is still a preganglionic neuron, and it's still obeying the 2-neuron rule. It's going to synapse with a postganglionic neuron. That postganglionic neuron can go to your heart to reduce heart rate. It can go to smooth muscle in your lungs to cause bronchial constriction. If you're not running for your life, you don't need more airflow. You're just sitting here. It can go to smooth muscle in your gut to increase gut motility. But cranial nerve 10 can't get to all of the lower regions of your abdominal cavity. It can't get to the pelvic bowl. That's too far. So cranial nerve 10 will communicate to a second neuron above a colic flexure. What is a colic flexure? You have your large intestine, you have the ascending colon on the right side, you have the transverse colon, then you have the descending colon. These two turns, ascending, transverse, descending, we've got to turn here and we've got to turn here. We've got to turn here and we've got to turn here. The turn on the right side is called your hepatic flexure. This is by your liver. There's also another name for it, the right colic flexure. Flexure means turn, colic, turn in your colon, it's your intestine really, and it's on the right side. The left colic flexure is called your splenic flexure because your spleen's on this side. What was the first one called? Right colic flexure, also known as hepatic. Left colic flexure, also known as splenic. Anything downstream of the left colic flexure, your descending colon, your sigmoid colon, anything in your pelvic bowl, anything downstream of this part of the large intestine and in your pelvic bowl, cranial nerve 10 can't get to. You can get to all of your small intestine with its postganglionic partner because your small intestine is before your large intestine. You can get to the ascending colon, it can get to the transverse. But during development, these structures downstream and in the pelvic bowl, cranial nerve 10, if it could talk to you, would go, yeah, I just can't grow that far. Too lazy. That's why you need sacral. That's why you need a part in the spinal cord that can grow preganglionic fibers, but from the spinal cord to get to these lower structures, like your bladder, your gonads. Those are involuntary as well. Okay? So, if we're talking about something beyond the left colic flexure, then the preganglionic fibers, cell bodies, in the sacral spinal cord, they are found at levels S2, S3, S4. In a lateral gray horn, but remember we have lateral gray horn somewhere else. So an anatomist says, which lateral gray horn? Maybe we should give them specific names. This one is called the sacral lateral gray column, or SLGC. What was it called for the lateral gray horn at levels T1 through L2? What was it called? IMLCC. So the anatomists, they got very clever and said, fine, we'll give them very specific names. So if I now say, you're in the SLGC, you, with enough studying, should turn to me and go, right then, here you're talking parasympathetic, and we are going to target things downstream of the left colic flexure. What do you want to know? Yes.
So the right colic flexure or the hepatic one, that's part of cranial.
Cranial nerve 10 with its partner can hit those things.
Okay.
Correct. So, what options does the parasympathetic fiber have that's coming off of S2, S3, S4. What options? Okay, well, first of all, you see this right here? That is a gray ramus connected to a sympathetic trunk. That's an exit route. Remember I said gray are found all along the vertebral column. Should a parasympathetic nerve enter here? It's sympathetic. And that's an exit, not an entrance. We don't use that. So here, this fiber exits through a ventral root, enters a spinal nerve. You see this structure. That's called a pelvic splanchnic nerve. Now, I'm very snobby. Splanchnic nerves have preganglionic fibers. I actually showed you a splanchnic nerve when we were doing sympathetic division. Okay. I'll show you in just a moment. Okay. Right here. Right there. That's a splanchnic because that's a preganglionic fiber. So splanchnic simply means preganglionic. That is a pelvic splanchnic nerve. It carries preganglionic fibers, and those preganglionic fibers must terminate on a postganglionic neuron that's probably found in the wall of the effector, like in the intestine. And it's going to terminate on the smooth muscle of the intestine or the bladder. But we call those terminal ganglia. These ganglia are found in the walls of their effectors. They are also called terminal ganglia. If I say terminal ganglia with enough studying, you should say, right then, Carrie, you're talking about the second neuron for the parasympathetic division. What do you want to know? We didn't call them terminal ganglia. We didn't call them terminal ganglia for the sympathetic division. We had very specific names for them. What were they? They were the sympathetic trunk of the sympathetic ganglia of the sympathetic trunk, if you remember. Or they were called paravertebral or collateral. Yeah, they had names. And the collateral, we even got more specific, didn't we? We called superior mesenteric ganglion, inferior mesenteric ganglion. But for parasympathetic, like I said, it's much simpler. It's much simpler. We just call them all terminal ganglia. That's what we call them. Dom's thinking about it. He's ruminating.
No, yeah, so is that orange, the terminal ganglia, that's the effector cell?
Everywhere here in orange in my picture
Yeah.
is showing you the post-ganglionic neuron.
Okay.
That's the soma, that's the axon, that's the terminus. All of these orange ones will terminate on cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, glands. Parasympathetic does not target fat. No, it does not. Thank goodness. Could you imagine going to sleep at night when your parasympathetic division has even more control and waking up with more fat cells than what you had when you went to bed? But if you're running for your life, we're glad that the sympathetic division targets fat because that's a fuel source. And if we're running for our life for a long time, I'm going to burn through glucose. I need a longer lasting fuel source. Okay? Which is awesome because when you exercise, that is actually a sympathetic moment. It's mild. You don't feel panicked for your life when you go to the gym, but your body is acting like you're in a sympathetic moment. And that's good, because then we're burning fat. Yay. Okay, craniosacral. Where will I find the preganglionic fibers? Either in the 4 cranial nerves listed here, or coming off the sacral lateral gray column at levels S2, S3, S4. All of them have to synapse on a postganglionic neuron. We have to have a 2-neuron rule. And all of those postganglionic neurons are called terminal ganglia. They're found in the wall of the effector. Like, for example, if we're talking about the heart, the terminal ganglia going to the heart would be found between the epicardium and the myocardium. Aren't the epicardium, myocardium, and endocardium layers of the heart? Wall of the heart? So these cells would be found between the epicardium and the myocardium. When you start learning about the digestive system and you look at a slide from an intestine, you can see the terminal ganglia underneath a microscope. Sympathetic postganglionic neurons, we can see. I told you can hold them in your hot little tweezer. Terminal ganglia for parasympathetic, you cannot see with the naked eye. You will not be able to say, here they are. You will have to see them under a microscope. They are microscopic. They are in the wall of the effector. Okay? So let's do the next homework problem. Okay? And then I will let you go. Not that I made you stay here, but I think it's enough.
Professor?
Yeah.
Does the parasympathetic system or division, does it work harder after you eat food and while you're sleeping?
Yeah. Resting, digesting, peeing, and reading is what we say.
So right now, our parasympathetic-
Right now, your parasympathetic divisions are more in control. You should not be in a sympathetic moment right here, right now with me. You should not be afraid of me. Right? Yes.
So what about driving though?
What about it?
Well, like some people like fear for their life, like get a mental capacity for like driving and like thoughts. Would that have any impact on sympathetic and parasympathetic, or would that still be parasympathetic?
So when the sympathetic division reacts, it reacts in what we say en masse together. If you think of anything frightening, you probably feel your heart rate go up. If you were driving and you're terrified of all the other drivers around you because you can't control them and they cut you off, and you feel like every time I drive, it's a near miss for an accident. Okay, you are associating a daily event now becoming a fearful event. Some people would say, that's not logical. It's not logical to be afraid like that every time you drive. A near miss for an accident, yeah. Like, I almost got in an accident. That's where some people get strong fears that some of us would go, that's not logical. Why are you afraid of that? So my son is very fearful of bees, to the point where he will not go to the nursery with me to help me pick out plants. He will not do yard work if it deals with doing yard work near flowered plants. He has been stung enough times where he has had to get a really nasty shot because of his progressively worsening allergic response. So because it has progressively worsened, he's terrified of bees, terrified. Most of us know that they will hurt if they sting, but most of us aren't going to have an anaphylactic response.
Yeah.
Mac is terrified because his is escalating. Okay? Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the same with that driver. If we're going for a fight mode.
Correct.
Okay.
Or anything you perceive as being a threat, you go into the fight or flight mode.
So when you struggle with anxiety, you have for no reason or whatever,
Well-
just for some people, it's no reason. For me, when I had it, it was like that. And I was always in sympathetic because I felt like I was constantly running super high. I couldn't eat. I would lose like a pound a day.
Yep.
For like weeks on end. I mean, it was so bad.
We respond to stress in different ways. And when you are under chronic stress, your body physically changes. And it is not healthy.
Well, no.
It leads to
You're
cardiovascular.
sweating, your heart is pounding. It's like
It's a lot of work.
you feel like you gotta run, but there's nothing to run from. It's terrible.
And that's called general adaptation syndrome, or GAS. Hans Selye was a lab technician, and he was awful. He was awful as a scientist. Awful. And he was in charge of taking care of the rats in the vivarium. He was responsible for injecting certain drugs and things like that into them because that's what they were studying. He would drop the rats on the floor. He'd break the syringes inside of them.
Oh.
He was awful. And the rats learned to recognize him. And they were extremely fearful because they knew pain was involved. And he noticed the changes in those rats. They had general adaptation syndrome as well. They had very overly worked adrenal medulla glands, sympathetic nervous system. They had cardiovascular issues. There is a PBS special called Stress, the Hidden Killer, the Silent Killer. Yeah. And in that 1 hour video, and I highly recommend it, Sapolsky, a scientist, studies long-term chronic stress and anxiety, not just in humans, but in other animals. He says, you wouldn't think of chronic stress as being an issue for any other animal but a human. We create our stresses. It's our society. But other animals have a societal structure where they too have chronic stress, like baboons, macaque monkeys. And he studied one particular baboon, what are they called? Baboon?
It's not like a pod.
It's not, but it'll come
But the
to
group
me.
of it, yeah.
A group of baboons. And he went every year, and he went over to Africa to study them, and he tranquilizes them, and he watches them, and he says, for a baboon, you only need 1 hour out of the day to get food. What do you do with the rest of the time when it's daylight? Answer, you pick on weaker baboons. So he noticed the alpha males would pick on the subservient males. And when he drew the blood for the subservient males, they had high levels of cortisol. They had cardiovascular disease. They clearly showed the stress of being picked on and had anxiety from it.
You get picked on and then you get sick. That's not fair.
Right. So this baboon group, 1 year when he went back to study them, most of them had died. And the reason why they did is because the baboons got into a human camp where they left behind rotten, spoiled meat. And the dominant males had first access. And they died from that food poisoning, which left the subservient ones to now come into power. And this baboon pack, it's not a pack,
Family or whatever.
those subservient males remembered their humble upbringing. The females loved the subservient males because the subservient males were like the best gay friend you've ever. The subservient males would like groom the female, and what female doesn't like her hair played with?
I mean, so it falls out.
It's called a troop.
Thank you. That's what it was. A troop.
Oh, that's so cool.
When another dominant male from another troop tried to infiltrate and take over, the subservient males would run them out. They wouldn't let any one baboon rise to power. They kept it to the point for that whole troop of, no, we know what it was like to be bullied and we're not having it. And the cortisol levels have gone down in that troop. Kind of neat, huh?
Even for the subservient.
So,
Is it called stress?
poison is the
Yes, that
answer?
one. Stress, the portrait of a killer. I'm sorry, dumb.
I think I understand it.
What's
Stress, the portrait of a killer.
that?
2008. It's on YouTube.
It is. And I do recommend it if you've got an extra hour. But it also talks about people who have careers, if they feel like they have control in their career, if they feel like they have autonomy or people listen to them and value their input, their stress levels at work are significantly lower. They call in to work fewer days sick. They overall aren't as costly for the company because they're not taking all those sick days. It's just overall better. And there's been a long-term study in England studying people because they have a different kind of, if you work for the government, they definitely have tiers. And the people in the lower tiers working for the English government, more sick days, more issues with cardiovascular health. The higher up in the ranks, fewer days calling in, less cardiovascular disease.
So do we experience more stress now with like these kinds of stressors as in like jobs and stuff, or like way back when we were like hunting for food and stuff?
Yeah, everything. Was
That's a
stressful
great question.
until-
We don't have studies from way back then.
Yeah.
But there are,
It's different kinds
people
of
living
stress.
in the bush and in.
True, but here's my kind of tongue-in-cheek. One person's stress or stressful event is another person's like, what? You're stressed out over that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
It is a matter of perspective, but it still counts. The stress is real.
The effect.
If it's not stressful to me, how dare I say, well, get over it? It shouldn't be. And that's where mental health disorders, anxiety is one of them. And anxiety can lead to depression, especially if you don't feel like you can get control over the stress, manage it. It can lead to substance abuse. It can lead to other psychological issues as well. So anxiety is nothing to go, get over it. Even more and more these days, you're seeing ads for different healthcare plans talking about stress and mental health awareness. It starts most of the time with anxiety, most of the time.
In the brain is the valves where stress is kind of produced,
No, that's not where it's produced.
or
There's the adrenaline.
There's
and the
interpretation.
okay, get that.
So our cerebral hemispheres, the cortex, like the frontal lobe, that is our place for logical thought and reasoning. If you perceive something to be stressful, creating anxiety, it could be that in that part of your head, you are perceiving that issue as a real issue that you can't handle.
Mine was never ever about a thing, anything that was going on. Like when my mom died, I was 14. I didn't have anxiety then. It was always when I was doing nothing. I was just sitting there, and then all of a sudden it just came like a flood of fear, and there was nothing to be afraid of.
It could also, when someone feels that way, it could be a thyroid disorder. This is very common in women. It could also be an adrenal medulla issue, like a pheochromocytoma. So if someone has a lot of thyroid hormone or a lot of epinephrine release, even though they might just be sitting here and then all of a sudden they get that feeling, many times it can be a hormonal issue. And that's the reason why. If you have any problem with anxiety, depression, any mental health issue, you should actually go see your primary care physician first before you start thinking, I need a therapist. Go see your doctor, because many health conditions can lead
Mine was
to
physical, so yeah.
it. So if it turns out you have a thyroid issue or an adrenal gland issue, your primary care physician can identify if those are the issues, help resolve them, and then maybe the anxiety goes away because now the hormone levels are now taken care of. Does that make sense? So seeing a therapist is a good idea, don't get me wrong. But if you feel like, no, this is getting to be more and more of a problem, it's impacting my daily life, it's impacting my relationships, please go see your primary care physician first. They're going to want to do blood work, they're going to want to do urine analysis, they're going to make sure there isn't some underlying physiological problem before we start going, okay, mental health issue. Make sense? Okay, so can I do my problem? And then get you out of here. All of that was recorded and has nothing to do with the job.
So sorry. We could cut it.
That's right. Takes longer for me to actually save it in a file that I can edit. It says, draw the sympathetic outflow from this level of the spinal cord to the stomach. Well, if it's sympathetic, we're going to shut down gut motility. That's what we're going to do. The stomach is part of your gut. Okay. So, I'm told I'm at T12. Is that part of where I can find the sympathetic division? It is. So I'm going to have my preganglionic fiber exit through ventral root, enter a white communicating ramus, and enter a splanchnic nerve to go to. So this is a splanchnic nerve. Not a pelvic, but it is a splanchnic. And it's going to go to a collateral ganglion and synapse there. Then the postganglionic neuron is going to terminate on the stomach. And it would release epinephrine, and this would reduce gut motility. If I'm running for my life, now is not the time to be digesting my food in my stomach. Okay, so that was one of the options that we covered for the sympathetic division. Wait.
That was the celiac ganglion that I went through?
Sure, or superior mesenteric or inferior mesenteric. So this would be the preganglionic, as it says to label, preganglionic sympathetic neuron. In orange, we have the postganglionic sympathetic ganglion. And the question also says, identify what neurotransmitters are released by both. The first one would release acetylcholine. Second one is going to release epinephrine. Okay?
Do we need to know like cholinergic versus adrenergic and metatropic?
Nope.
Thank you.
Nope. And you just made the rest of them around you vomit. What the hell? Then it says, what would happen to the stomach activity when this pathway is activated? Well, we would have decreased gut motility. The next problem says, complete the picture by drawing the parasympathetic outflow to the stomach. Label any structures you draw and write down the neurotransmitters that are released by both neurons. Okay, well, if it's parasympathetic, and I'm going to the stomach, is the stomach before or after the left colic flexure?
Before.
It's before. So should I use a sacral? Mm-mm. What cranial nerve should I use?
10.
10. So here's my cranial nerve 10. Coming down. It's going to terminate. It's going to release acetylcholine, of course. It's going to terminate on a terminal ganglia, which is in the wall of the involuntary effector. And that postganglionic neuron will also release acetylcholine, and that will lead to increased gut motility. Okay. So the X says, what types of fibers would be found in the structure with an X on it? What is the name of the structure with the X on it? Well, my X clearly, increased gut motility would be from cranial nerve 10, right? That's parasympathetic. That's preganglionic. Parasympathetic. And then that orange one is part of a terminal ganglion. It would be the postganglionic parasympathetic. My X has clearly shifted. That's where it's supposed to be. So where is that X located? Or what would we find in those structures? The name of where the X is an anterior primary ramus. It is the bigger branch coming off of the spinal nerve. Remember, the small one back here is the posterior. There aren't very many structures behind your spinal cord. So that's an anterior primary ramus, and it says what fibers would be found here. It's mixed. We'd have sensory. We'd have motor. We would have all kinds of sensory and all kinds of motor. We would. We would have visceral motor. We would have visceral sensory. We would have somatic sensory. We would have somatic motor. So all of them would be there. Yeah. It's called an anterior primary ramus. Okay, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Sure.